All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. And for those of you who've been waiting online, I apologize for starting a few minutes late, but we are here and we're going to jump right into um, our meeting. And so let me just give you a back history. First of all, I'm Tyrone Nelson. I represent the Varina district where we are. Um, 5 districts in Henrico County. Varina is the easternmost, and we're glad to be here this evening. Well, I'll tell you a story in a second, but let me just officially make note, especially for those of you who are watching online. We are live streaming this evening's town hall on WebEx, so residents can watch it remotely. I know we have a few on now. If you're online and you would like to ask a question during the meeting, please use the chat feature to send a message to the host, and the host will then share the questions with me. And when we get to the end of the presentations, we'll open it up for questions. For those of you in the audience, we ask that you raise your hand and we will bring a microphone to you so that you can ask your question aloud, also so that it can be heard online. We do have several persons with us. I want to share that one of our residents, Ms. Sharon Klein, who is right here in front of us, is in front of me, reached out to me. I think I went back and looked at the emails. I think it was the end of April, and asked, and I think it was prompted because there was a public comment open process, I think from April the 9th through May the 9th, about these Title V air permits. And Ms. Klein reached out to ask whether or not we could set up a platform so that DEQ could answer some questions. And so we started there. And we reached out to DEQ. This is not a public hearing. This is a volunteer informational session. And we have several people here from DEQ who are going to, I don't know who's going to make presentations per se, but we got several persons here who are prepared and ready to answer questions, are here in support of the work that DEQ does. I do want to shout out our Deputy County Manager, Steve Yob, who has been really instrumental in the work that we have been doing in the county, and helped to, between him and Courage Chatina, our Chief of Staff, set this meeting up. So Steve, thank you. I appreciate you being here today. We have with us Michael G. Dowd. Michael G. Dowd is the director of DEQ's Air and Renewable Energy Division. He oversees air quality planning, permitting, compliance, monitoring, and mobile source programs, as well as the Small Renewable Energy Permit by Rule program. Also, we have Tamara Thompson, who is the director of the Office of Air Permit Programs, and I think I'm going to turn it over to her in a second. And we also want to recognize Mr. Jerome Brooks, who is the regional director of the Piedmont office of DEQ. And so they're here. This is a community meeting in the Varina district that we are hosting, but DEQ is going to, in essence, give the information, answer the questions, etc. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Ms. Thompson. I shared my suit coat is resting there. I think that I had it on earlier. Well, for those of you who wear suit jackets, I put it on a hanger, I shut the door, and I think it was hanging outside of my car while I was driving. And so my arm, so generally I have a jacket on. So my arm was completely wet when I went to put it on. The suit jacket is. So ignore it, as it has its place up there. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Ms. Thompson. I think there's a presentation that will be made. and then there'll be open questions and answers. All right. So we're gonna try to move through and make sure that we give you guys adequate time for questions and answers. Ms. Thompson.
Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone is having a good day and didn't get caught in the rain. We got caught when we were leaving downtown and one of these bad storms rolling through. So bottom of my pants legs are wet and his arms wet. I am Tamara Thompson. I am the manager of the Air and Renewable Energy Air Permitting Programs. I've been with the agency since 1992. It's been there a long time. And we were asked to come and give you a little presentation about the Title V permit program. There are several permit programs within DEQ Air Division, and this is one of the programs. So I'm going to give you an explanation. It's not a long presentation at all. So I'll give you an idea about the program itself, and then we will open it up to questions. Any kind of questions you have, we will be happy to answer. Okay, first of all, like I said, there are several different types of air permits that we issue. These are the main type of permits that we issue. Our regulations can be found in the Virginia Administrative Code. Chapter 80 lists all our permitting programs, and as you can see, Article 1 is the Title V permit program. Now, there are two general types of air permits. There are new source review permits, NSR, which authorizes the construction operation. So this is the kind of permit you would get if you're going to build a new facility. This is the permit that you get. And then there are operating permits, which are separate from those permits, and the operating permits have a special purpose to them. Okay, let me talk a little bit about pre-construction permits, because I think these are probably the ones you are most familiar with. In Virginia, the pre-construction permits that we issue, they authorize both the construction and operation of a facility. They are required before construction can begin. And this is where all the meat and potatoes for permit requirements come into play. In these permits, we establish what the emission limits are going to be. We establish what control equipment will be required, the throughput, the operational limits, work practice standards, what kind of monitoring, what kind of record keeping, what kind of reporting. All that is put in the construction permit. And our permits are supposed to make sure, one of the purposes of the permit is to assure that the national ambient air quality standards are being met. So those are the pre-construction permits. Title V operating permit. I know probably first question is, why is it Title V? Well, it's Title V. It comes from the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments, and this was Title V of the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990. So that's why it's called Title V. Now, Title V only applies to a subset of sources. They only apply to people who are major. So the people that emit the most pollution are the ones that fall under the Title V program. So if they emit more than 100 tons or greater of pollutants, particular pollutants, nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, particulate matter, either size 10 microns or 2.5 microns, or volatile organic compounds. Or if it's a facility that emits more than 10 tons of a single hazardous air pollutant or more than 25 tons of a combination of hazardous air pollutants, then you trigger the Title V program and you have to get a Title V permit. All right, there are a couple of types of Title V permits. So there's the initial Title V permit, and a source has to apply for the Title V permit 1 year after they've started operation, if they're a major source, or if they become a major source because the facility has added equipment and therefore their emissions have crossed over that 100-ton threshold, they have 12 months to apply for us for a Title V permit. Now, Title V permits actually expire every 5 years, but if the expiration is coming up, the facility gets the permit into us prior to 6 months before the expiration date, and there's enough information in that permit application to demonstrate that everything is going to stay pretty much the same, then they can receive what's called an application shield. And that way the permit may expire, but they're under an application shield, which means they will continue to operate under that current permit until a new permit is issued. And then, of course, we do modifications to Title V permits as well. Now, what is the purpose of a Title V? Title V has a specific purpose, and this is actually the big thing about Title V. What it does, it takes all the underlying permits that there may be for a facility and they puts it into one document, okay? It takes all the federal standards that may apply to the facility and it puts it in one document. It takes all the underlying new source performance standards and all the hazardous air pollutant standards that are federal, puts it in the same document. And each condition in that permit will tell you where it came from, whether it was in a permit, whether it was from a federal standard, where it came from. And it also makes sure that the monitoring, record keeping, and recording demonstrate compliance with these requirements. Now, why do we do that? Why do we put everything into one permit document? Some permits, some are facilities, when somebody files an application, gets an application number, application 1, application 2, application 3, application 4, each one of those results in a permit. We actually have facilities that have over 100 applications. So over the course of time, we've issued them over 100 permits. So what this Title V does, it takes all those requirements from all those permits, it puts it in one document so that the public and the inspector and anyone else can go to that one document and find out everything that applies to that facility, as opposed to going through multiple air permits to try to figure out what is covered. Now, there are things also that come specifically with the Title V permit. For one, facilities that are Title V are required to submit semi-annual compliance reports to us. They are also required to, every year, they have to submit an annual compliance certification. They send a certification to us saying we are in compliance with our permit. Now, one of the big things about the Title V permit is we charge sources for every ton of pollution that they emit, we collect a fee from. And this fee is actually what runs the program. Now, right now, for this year, the fee is $104.82 per every ton of pollution. As you can imagine, having to pay for a ton of pollution has been a great motivator for people reducing the amount of pollution they put out, because the less pollution they put out, the less money they have to pay. So it actually has been very effective in that respect. And they also have an annual maintenance fee as well as the $1 per ton fee. And like I said before, we renew the permits every 5 years. And this is actually the only permit we have in our program, in the entire air program, that expires. Every other permit, we have permits that were issued in the 70s and 80s that are still valid. They don't expire. Now, what does Title V not do? Okay. We can't put any kind of new requirements in a Title V permit. That is not what the permit allows. We can't put new emission limits. We cannot put new control equipment, new work practice, new throughput, new operating restrictions. We do not do new air quality analysis under the Title V permit. It does not require new local government certification, and it does not require new site suitability, because the facility is already there. It's already been built and it's already there. Public comment period. Every Title V permit has a public comment period. Comment period is always for 30 days, and it has to be advertised in a local paper. It's also on the DEQ website. We also have a mailing list. If you want to be on that mailing list, just let us know, where we send notification of every Title V permit that we're going to issue goes out to people on that mailing list to let them know we're getting ready to issue a Title V permit and the public comment period is open. And this is also the only program where we have to send that public comment notice to other states if the facility is within 50 miles of the state border. After we're done with our 30-day comment period, we send it to EPA, and EPA has a 45-day comment period where they take the permit, in addition to the permit itself, any comments we received, our response to comments, and we send all that up to EPA, and they review it to make sure that it meets the requirements that we're supposed to be meeting as a state. Public hearing request. We don't have an automatic public hearing for Title V's, but you can request a public hearing. And the hearing request has to be submitted during the comment period, but there's information that we got to have in the request. First of all, who's requesting the information? Where do they live? Sometimes we have received, we'll get a request for a comment period and the person lives in South Carolina. I'm not really sure why they need to comment on our permit, but anyway. Why are you asking for that? Is there something, what is in the permit that you think is should be different or is not correct, is not following the law. Virginia is not following the law. This condition number 25 says X, and we think that that condition is not adequate enough, or that condition should say something else. That's what we're looking for. The hearing request, the director will grant a request if there gets significant public interest, which means 25 individual requests. This is all set out in state law. The requester has to identify, like I said, what is wrong with this permit. It's not just that we don't like the permit. What exactly is wrong with the permit? And if the person who is commenting finds something that we have put in the permit that is not consistent with state or federal law, that's also a reason to grant a hearing. Now, after the permit has been issued, somebody doesn't like it, what they do is kind of a different process. It's not like we normally do with a permit where you would sue and go to court. You actually petition EPA. The petitions must be made within 60 days of EPA's ending their 45-day review. You saw before where 45 days after the public comment period, EPA looks at it. You have 60 days to ask petition. And only petitions can be made by the commenter. So if you didn't comment on the permit, you can't petition. You cannot include any new information if you petition. And EPA will either grant or deny in full or in part the petition. Okay, this is my favorite quote because it's the best thing I've ever seen to sum up Title V. This was in a Federal Register notice that EPA put out. Put simply, Title V is a catch-all, not a cure-all. In other words, it pulls everything together, but it doesn't really allow you to do anything extra. And with that, short and sweet, here are some resources. We put up, if you're not aware, every single application that comes into DEQ is posted on our website. So you can go to the first one, the permit enhanced, or you can go to the air permitting page. And on the DEQ air permitting page, there's a spreadsheet that tells you every single application that we've received. And it tells you when we received it and what type of permit it is. Also, you can look up the Title V regulation. And of course, the DEQ webpage has all kinds of information. Okay.
All right. So don't go.
Oh, I'm not going anywhere. I'm still around.
No,
My helper's here.
all right, let's leave up, maybe let's leave this up, or we'll go wherever you want us to go as it relates to information. So I have a list of questions here, but I'd rather take the questions that are in person first, and then maybe we can circle back. We had one person that sent us like 9 questions, and I think we may have sent that to you. I think that, so is that mic working? It's not working?
Hello.
Okay, all right. So in the room, but not on WebEx, but we can use it. And then I'll just repeat it for the people on WebEx, okay? All right, thank you for the presentation. Questions from the floor? Yes, ma'am.
I have a lot. So basically, the Title V is, from the presentation, I understand it's kind of in perpetuity.
Yes.
So once company facility gets issued Title V, they're good forever.
But they have to renew the permit every 5 years.
All right, hold on. I'm sorry. So you come over here and you answer into the mic. The question is Title V in perpetuity? And so do me a favor.
Yes, sir.
Once they ask you the question, just kind of repeat it back so that person's online.
Okay,
Yeah.
no problem.
All right.
Yes, the Title V permit is in perpetuity, but they do have to renew it every 5 years.
And follow-up is, suppose something is scientific data discovers that are formerly safe, substance thought to be safe is found to be unsafe by the EPA. And it's emitted from that facility.
Mm-hmm. Do
What happens then?
you want to take it?
Sure.
This is my boss. I always defer to my boss, like every good employee.
That would depend on the type of information it is and what type of action EPA took. EPA, the Clean Air Act has imposes many requirements on EPA when it discovers information on something that may be toxic. There's a whole provision in the EPA regulations that require it to address new toxic materials in processes and industrial processes. If it's discovered, EPA can go back and amend its air toxics regulations. If EPA promulgates a new air toxic regulation or a new what we call maximum achievable control technology standard for a certain category, then the source, regardless of how it had been permitted in the past, would have to meet those new standards. And this happens in various aspects of EPA's rulemaking. For instance, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards that set standards, national standards for particulate matter and SO2 and things like that. If EPA goes through has new scientific data, they go through the process of amending the NACs, then we have to assure that the NACs are met. Even at the source level, we have to come up with a plan to achieve the NAC. So there can be many complex ways EPA addresses new information, addresses how to regulate sources when it gets new information. It's not an easy path, and it's certainly not a quick one,
So
but it is possible.
Title V,
Well-
if that, they have something that they have included in
Yep.
the Title V, and it says, this is fine. At the time of the issue, permit is issued. 15 years down the road, EPA says, oh, that is bad, but it's fine under their Title V. Do they have to amend their Title V?
And that gets to the answer is yes when it comes up for renewal. If there is a new federally applicable standard that EPA promulgates between between the Title V that had been issued and then when it gets reissued, the new standard has to go in there, but it will have already gone through another regulatory process at the state.
Well, and also if there's a new standard, whether it's in the permit or not, the facility has to meet it. So if the standard comes out and it's more stringent than what's in the permit, doesn't matter what's in the permit, they have to meet the more stringent requirement.
Who's doing the certification for renewal of the Title V?
Who's doing the certification? You mean from the company? Who certifies? It's a responsible corporate official. Do you have anything to add, Tamara? I mean, a corporate vice president, somebody with some responsibility. In fact, that person used to be called the designated felon.
Yeah.
Because if no, seriously,
That's the person.
That's-
That's how I tell people. It's the person that will have to go to jail if they falsified information. And there is actually a case in Virginia where that has happened. So yeah, that is, so we don't take, like the janitor can't sign the certification. It's got to be a responsible official.
There's no third party that are.
No, it's got to be somebody associated with the facility.
Oh, no, that's a good question. No, it cannot be a consultant. You can't hire that out. Now, there may be consultants that get involved, but at the end of the day, it has to be that responsible corporate official who signs off on that work. And he or she is ultimately responsible. Yes, ma'am.
All right. I have a lot of questions about the 400 generators that has to the QTS data center project. Right here, I just have a couple. My concern has been, not just those 400, but they are additional $400 projects, these generators. Okay.
Well, I think there's been some confusion on this matter. I know about last month or a month and a half ago, there was a very misleading article in the Richmond Times-Dispatch that appeared to indicate that QTS was installing an additional 400 generators or something like that. This Title V permit is not allowing any new generators to go on the QTS site. All those generators that are up there, all the ones that were referred to in that article had already been permitted over the past years. So those generators, there's no expansion going on under this permit. All those generators that are there have already been permitted.
Even though the buildings aren't operational yet, because I'm seeing them.
No, that's correct. They haven't, you have to get your permit before you can begin construction. And in this case, I think the permit was issued in 24 for the I mean, the data center has been there since, I believe, 2011, and I'm looking to the back room and getting the nods. It has gone through various expansions over the years, and I think the most recent one was was last year in 24, May of 2024. Now, sources, when they get the new source review permit, have 18 months to commence construction on their site, and they have to notify us and all that. So it's not unusual at all to get your permit, and then construction will go on for the next few years. That's not unusual at all, because you need your permit before you can turn any dirt.
How can the public have information about how much nitrous oxide goes in that market and any additional that may be going into that way?
Yeah, and that's
Can you?
yeah. Oh, okay. Sharon, you'd like to know where the public can get information on how much pollution has actually been emitted from these facilities. And I'll say one thing that I think I'll need some help on the actual answering of that question, but you'll see in these permits that there are permit limits. Well, I want to make clear that with respect to the generators at QTS, they are to be operated only in emergency situations. So their permit limits and hours of operation go far beyond what they actually operate, because they only are supposed to turn on when they test. They can do reasonable testing, or when the lights go out, when the grid goes down. So while they do test, and the testing is limited, the only time they would turn on and operate is when the grid goes down, and that is extremely rarely. If they're operating in non-emergency situations to generate power outside of a testing scenario, then they're breaking the law. Oh, yeah, that's another good point. I'm not sure how many generators are up there at QTS. A lot, 500, around there, something like that. The way data centers operate, they need power all the time. They build redundancy into their systems. So even if the grid goes down, likely only a third of those engines would ever kick on. There wouldn't be all 500. It'd be, 150 or something like that, because of the redundancy built in. Because if one of those emergency generators failed, then they can turn on another one. So they look, it sounds exceedingly impressive, and it sounds like there could be lots of pollution. In real life, there won't be, there isn't, because they can only operate during emergency situations, which are very, very rare. I mean, data centers need the power all the time, and they're very, very skittish. I don't know what the word is. They're very nervous. If they lose power, they lose their business. So they have to have the redundancy in the generation, and that's, they have far more equipment than they actually need.
Let me add something.
Yes, go ahead, Jerome. Jerome Brooks from our
I think a part of the question was, how were you able to determine the emissions or what they did on an annual basis? And these size facilities have to submit what we consider to be an annual update annually. So once a year, they submit their throughputs and emissions to us. Now, I'm not sure anything if that information is available outside of FOIA. It's not. Okay, but we do have that information, and they have to submit that to us, and our inspectors check that every year to see whether or not they're in compliance with their emission limits and their throughputs that are in the permit. So I think I'm trying to answer some of your question. Okay.
Want some assurance that as the continued development of data centers goes forward, that on the needs and things, it says right there that QTS is a known source of air pollution. Can you start with pollution, and then you're adding, I understand what you said about the generators. And then my question is, how do we know that with the magnitude of numbers that will continue to probably the permit that we're having clean air?
Yeah, well, a lot of that's going to get to the monitoring network too.
Yeah, gets to monitoring, gets to the buffers.
Yeah.
Around. I mean, a lot of the pollution that would come out of these generators because the stacks are so small, the sources are small, would fall, fall closer to the facility. And in QTS's case, there are some rather large boundaries between residential areas and the facilities themselves. But to get back, and I thank Jerome for pointing that out. I sort of got lost in the other stuff I was saying, but he's right. You can ask for the data, the annual data that they submit to us, and we look at that, and we've looked at data center, especially up in Northern Virginia, where we have a whole lot of them. We look at it very closely to see when they are operating. And if we see patterns where they're operating, we'll ask them, why were you operating then? This wasn't a test. Was this a test? And we've filed several enforcement actions up in Northern Virginia. January, Tamara?
Well, no, I was just going to say, just to let you know, the facility right now with all the engines, our latest information on how much they emitted of NOx, they're permitted to emit up to 249. Is that correct? What's the 180? 190 is what they're permitted to emit, but they have only emitted 33 tons last year. 30 tons of NOx. She was asking about nitrogen oxide. There was 30, sorry, I got 33 again. There were 30 tons of nitrogen oxide. So even though they were allowed 190, and that 190s is in the case that the emergency does kick on and they have to run for an emergency. But most of the data centers we have, they may have numbers that are close to 100 or over 100, but rarely do their actual emissions ever exceed anything above 40 tons a year of nitrogen oxide.
And that's because it's against the law for them to operate under any circumstances other than emergencies or routine testing.
So we have another question in the back.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't think I need the microphone.
Just use it in
Yeah.
thank you.
Sorry.
And remember to repeat. So
Yeah.
repeat.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Okay. So I just need to get this straight on my head, how DEQ and how the local county is guarding this, because we have two situations that are concerning, one with the PFAS and one with the ethylene oxide situation in Charles City Road. And they are allowed to turn in their reports. But we know that with ethylene oxide, EPA found out a couple of years ago that they were exceeding the emissions. And we are like one of the fourth highest risk on cancer risk for the ethylene oxide. So it seems to me like DEQ, and I appreciate all the work you all do. Same thing with all the county staff. I appreciate it. This is like a learning process. And it seems to me like there needs to be better communication between DEQ and the county. I don't know who it would be, the health department, not sure who, but there needs to be better communication on oversight to these sites. Because the truth is that when you look at the health impacts of what's happening in Varina as a district, we're getting bombarded from everywhere. Air pollution from the airport, Richmond Gasworth, the ethylene oxide, sterilization services, you name it. And if you look at the numbers of people with cardiovascular disease and asthma is very high in Vermont. And so we need to be very, very careful about what else we're allowing and how can we, whenever you get that annual report, who's doing the report? Like, are you all going in there? Is the county going in there and seeing it? Or is the fox guarding the hen house? I mean, it's like, can we get better oversight about our people, about DEQ and Henrico County going in there and doing the audit themselves and not actually accepting it? To me, that feels better. It feels like we're getting a better result of what's happening, how it's impacting the community. We have to, Varina, we have to, because we have too many cases of cardiovascular disease and just diseases, and it's not stopping. So how can we make it more transparent? How can we make it where you all work together? So we don't have a PFAS and we don't have an ethylene oxide issue with the data center.
Okay, well, I'm not quite sure how I characterize that question. I think you're asking what avenues can we work together on collaboratively? First, I just want to say that back last year, there was a meeting that EPA came down to. I attended as well on ethylene oxide, and that involved one facility in Henrico. Just to be clear, I don't think that the data center engines are a source of ethylene oxide or PFAS pollution, but I understand your concern on that. I think you're asking how do we enforce the law? How can you be certain that we're doing a good job? We look at the data, we inspect the data centers, we do the best we can. I'll put it that way. We don't have huge staff to do it. A lot of our compliance program, I mean, this is a dirty little secret of environmental enforcement throughout the country, is often on, self-reporting. We look behind that when we can. We inspect facilities on a regular, although not very frequent basis, unless it's a problem facility that we've had a lot of compliance issues with. Certainly all our data is available to look at publicly. EPA looks over our shoulder too on a lot of issues. I'm open to suggestions. Okay, yes, sure, certainly, Jerome, please.
So just to try to answer some of that too, EPA has a compliance monitoring strategy they put out every 4 or 5 years. I think the latest one I saw for air might have been 2016. And they have requirements in there for cycles of inspections for different facilities. Title V, they say once every 2 years. About sometime around in 2007, we approached EPA and said, we'd like to do something different in Virginia. We like to develop a risk-based strategy that may not be consistent with your strategy. We went through a period of a couple of years trying to negotiate that. So when we look at that data, if we see trends, we have been approved since 2007 to send our inspectors out to a place more often than is required by the national CMS. So that's one thing we look at too. So if we identify that data and see trends, then the managers get together and inspectors may go out once a year. The self-reporting is huge for us because we don't have unlimited resources, but it gives us a chance to look at what you're doing. And when you certify that data, again, you put yourself on the hook. So if it's certifying that data, when it comes to us, you're responsible for it. So when we go out and do inspections, we check the records to verify that that data is consistent with what you sent in. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
And Jerome certainly knows what he's talking about. He is a former air inspector, and he was in charge of the state's air compliance program for several years as well. Thank you.
Can I just add really quick? Yes, in that EPA was doing a good job. Now, we don't know because of the current situation. We don't know that we can count on EPA because of all the cuts. So that's where I think that probably community, county, and state can work together to do a better job. So that I don't know that we can count on EPA as much right now.
We'd be very willing to hear your ideas and work with you as we go forward. Compliance has always been it's difficult, but it's very important. I hear you. Thank you.
And I'll just add, just to let you know, we actually, someone on my staff visited the sterilization services earlier this week to make sure that they are on schedule to get the controls that they need to put in on when it's supposed to be done. And they are still on, they are working very hard to get those controls in. So we're keeping a sharp eye on them. We're making sure that those controls are going in like they're supposed to be. So that is on our radar.
Yes, sir. Mr. Tar, we'll go to you next, and then I'm going to slip in a couple of these online questions, if that's okay. Mr. Tar, yes, where's the microphone now? Okay, yep.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all being here. Couple questions I had. On one of the middle slides, you had that the Title V does not do this thing, the whole list of things that everybody would hope that come in.
Oh, thanks.
First question I have, are those, go back to where it said what, right? So
Does not that.
does that come from the federal law saying that it can't be that, or is that in the state code in our interpretation?
That's from the Clean Air Act. It's from the Federal Clean Air Act. Yes, sir. Yeah, he wanted to know where that came from. If I could repeat the question, whether that requirement that we can't add anything new comes from state law or federal law, and it's federal law.
Okay. Quick comment had to be, Chief Roman's here, then, is it there was a figure in there that said $100 change.
Mm-hmm.
For the company's putting in a permit, I want to put 1,000 tons of, they pollute into the air every year. $100,000 for something like that, it's surrounding here. You're talking about being a talking to somebody who's putting out millions or billions of tons of something. To me, that, I don't know where that number is set, but it seems to me that if adjusted for inflation, that's, you commented that it is a deterrent. I don't think it's certainly a significant enough deterrent. If it was, you add another 0 or 2, maybe to it, they consider doing much better than they are now.
Well, you'd be surprised because emissions have dropped sharply over the past 15, 20, ever since 1990 when Title V went into effect. Now, there are a lot of other factors in play also. The use of coal has dwindled, things like that. But certainly since 1990, emissions have gone way down, and it's had a rather substantial impact on funding our program as well. We're almost getting punished for reduced pollution, even though the regulations don't go away. No, I hear what you're saying. I mean, but emissions have gone way down. So,
Last question.
and the fee, how the fee's set, it's set by statute with, and it's a really weird sounding number. It's cost of living increases and stuff like that. That's why it's 105.83. That's state. That's state. We had some discretion on how we set the fees, and we've reset them a couple of times since 1990.
At this point, it had to do with the quite a bit of comments here about generators and things coming in with that. The last couple of proposals I've seen that have come through the county and some things that got approved, and things that have been in the permits, whatever, keep referring back to the Tier 2 generators, the diesel emissions, which first came out last century, 90s. Tier 3 came out almost 20 years ago, and Tier 4 came out in 2012. You talked about in here when you renew a permit that a company should be using the best applicable standards for what they're doing. Why are we considering applications for companies currently with technology that's over 20 years old? Understand from their standpoint, hey, if I can put this generator in for $100,000, the other one's 150 or 102, they're pick the 100. It was something that came out last year or just something for recent. We're talking about things that came out 20 years ago and 13 years ago. You explain why those aren't done.
Well, first, the question was, can we explain why we're not requiring Tier 4 engines for?
We require best.
Yeah, and we generally do for new sources. There has been recently, sometimes things move more slowly than you'd like, our more recent applications for data centers have included Tier 4, what we call Tier 4 equivalent engines. I think Amazon has proposed a big data center up in the Northern Virginia area that will have Tier 4 equivalents. It's coming. It's coming perhaps more slowly than we would like. We have been trying to nudge our big data center companies to adopt more. What they tell us, what they have told us over the past few years is that, gee, they're too hard to get. Not so much expensive, but the pipeline isn't there. But for some of the big ones like Amazon, they can get whatever they want. And I think they're coming to the table slowly, but I think that we will not see too many more big data center applications, if any big data center applications that won't have tier 4 equivalents. I know that's a priority for our director, wants to get that, and I'd love to see that as well. So your point is well taken, and we're working towards that.
I think, anybody else have any other questions before I go online? Okay, so here, so I see you over here and then, over to my left.
Thank you for being here. How much technical expertise does somebody need to have? If they're in the community, the local council or board has already approved something, it's gotten to a Title V permit application status, and somebody just wants to email and say, here's my name and address, and I just am really worried about this like tubular pollution. Is that enough, or do they need to have these, like, I think you referred to the technical aspects, how technical do they have to be? How informed do they have to be?
Well, I'll start off. Tamara, you may want to add to this. Obviously, the question is, how technical do comments have to be with respect to permit applications? This is complicated stuff. And for us, the more technically oriented comments are, the better. I don't know, there are organizations out there that do help, that have technical expertise, that do pro bono. We also will, staff can take time to try to explain things to the public if there are questions, and we work awfully hard at doing that. I don't know, the more technical expertise, the better. It is difficult. I understand where, a layperson would find it difficult. And I say I'm stumbling here. Stan.
I don't think you're stumbling necessarily, but I guess to kind of further the response.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I am Stanley Faggart. Another DEQ employee. Tamara is my direct boss. Mike is my boss's boss. So that's kind of where I fit in the food chain. But just trying to go a little bit further for your question, we are always, this one, right? I'm sorry. We are always willing to talk either in person or in the phone with any community member about any of your air permitted sources, both at the central office where we work, and I think Jerome would say the same thing for his regional staff. And we will, at whatever level of technical knowledge you have, that's where we'll try to meet you and communicate with you. And then to the extent that your specific question was about the comments, and I think that's what I would kind of build on Mike's answer a little bit there, in that if you looked at a draft Title V permit and you see some conditions that maybe talk about record keeping or that maybe talk about an emission limit, and you have questions about those particular permit conditions, again, you feel free to call us, feel free to email us. We will more than willing to talk to you. And then based upon those responses, you can then decide, okay, how do I want to comment? Do I want to comment? What kind of comments should I make, if any? So that's the only thing I would.
I think it's a question back in back.
Yes.
So I think we mentioned this idea of the Indian air quality standards, how we're measuring attainment. We're all understanding that we're meeting those standards, but I just took a look at the map, and Virginia is about 40,000 square miles. We have about 25 monitoring stations that don't seem to monitor anything beyond the fence line. How can we trust that we're meeting attainment standards when we have so few monitors in our communities?
Well, our monitoring, the question is, how do we know that we're in attainment throughout the state when we appear to have so few monitors? I'd guess I'd start answering that by saying that our monitoring network is actually rather extensive. It's been set up over time to site the monitors according to strict EPA criteria in the places where we believe that there would be the highest concentrations of those criteria pollutants, mostly urban areas, along interstates. There simply are not a lot of monitors in rural areas because there are no sources of those of pollution that would cause, that would need to be monitored. Ozone is an interesting pollutant because sometimes we have gotten exceedances in very rural areas. And what we've said about that there, like in the Shenandoah National Park, a lot of that's been caused by transport. But we do the best we can under EPA siting criteria to site them where we believe the highest concentrations are. And in large areas where you don't see any monitors, it's because this judgment has been made that there really is no reason to believe there would be NAAQS exceedances in those areas. Not a perfect answer, but yes.
Modeling we do?
Well, we do modeling for air sources, and let me add to that. Tamara's right. Even if we have a big source that's going into into a place where there are not monitors close by, we most cases model that source to assure that its worst case emissions will not result in any ambient air, any exceedance of the ambient air quality standard. So we do rely on modeling as well. It's not as good as monitoring, obviously, but it gets you in the ballpark. And I want to be specific about QTS. That question has come up about QTS, and maybe Stan would be the best person to answer this one. But there are actually numerous monitors that surround this area in Henrico County.
Yeah, I think when I was checking into this particular question, we have 3 monitors, one to the south of the QTS site near the Shirley Plantation down on the James River. We have one north of QTS up into Hanover County. And I forget the exact location, address of that one. I think it's about 8 miles north of QTS though. And then we have one to the west at, I think it's actually another Henrico. I would have to check the location, but it's kind of north of the airport, but near the intersection of 360 and I think 64. Yeah. And so we've got one to the west, one to the north, and one to the south of the QTS facility, and what is relatively close proximity compared to most of our stationary sources anyway. The only all 3 of those monitors have been showing declining ozone values over the past few years. Yeah.
I need a clarification when you said, this guy.
This guy, yeah.
The ozone was by transport.
Yeah.
To you.
Ozone, and this gets me into another point about why we don't maybe need a whole lot of monitors for ozone. Ozone is a very regional type pollutant. And what I mean by that is you have emissions of NOx and volatile organic compounds, and they react in the sunlight and heat, and it creates ozone over generally broad areas. Ozone and what we call ozone precursors can travel great distances. And there's something out there called the Good Neighborship. EPA has tried to promulgate regulations to prevent the transport of pollute or to limit the transport. What I mean by transport is that we can have exceedances of the ozone standard in Virginia that result from emissions of oxides of nitrogen in Pennsylvania or Ohio or North Carolina. And our emissions of certain pollutants like NOx pollutants can cause exceedances up in New York.
I guess, yeah, I
transport.
think the best way to think of it is, when the wildfires in Canada, how the wind brings them down. Same thing for other pollutants, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide. Those also come the same thing. They come from the power plants or facilities out in Ohio, West Virginia, and it travels across, if the sun's right, volatile organics, and actually trees emit volatile organics. So that actually is a source of volatile organics. If it's hot enough, the reaction will take place and that forms ozone. So the goal is to reduce as much nitrogen dioxide as you can, because you're not going to cut down your trees, although there are other sources of VOCs, volatile organics. But that's what happens. It comes in from somewhere else. So some of it we reproduce ourselves, and some of it our neighbors help us to cause problems.
And it gets to another question about related to the monitoring. We don't need for ozone and PM 2.5, since they are the result mostly of atmospheric reactions. You don't need to put a monitor next to every individual source. You can put a monitor, as Stan was indicating, space them around a metropolitan area, and you get a pretty good idea what your ozone concentrations are everywhere within that area. They're going to vary very little. They won't vary greatly whether you're next to a source of pollution or whether you're 5, 10, 20 miles away. It'll be relatively the same concentrations because of the atmosphere, the way the atmosphere creates the ozone. So.
All right, yes, another question. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to piggyback really quick on that to ask a question about emissions transferring and flowing down from. We have the Chesterfield gas plant, proposed gas plant, built across the river. And studies have shown that we will be affected by emissions going down further south of us here in Varina. And so models have shown that will be affected. The same thing as the James River water, the James River would be affected. How does DEQ intend to make sure that the Virginia Clean Air Act is Energy Act is enforced, and also DEQ has the climate action, comprehensive climate action plan that calls for reducing greenhouse gases, and it seems that the projected emissions from the gas plant will not will be over what's called for what's called on the
Well,
DEQ intend to.
I think the question, the most important part of your question to me is how is DEQ going to assure that emissions from the CERC plant, the Chesterfield Energy Reliability Center project, will not exceed any health-based air quality standards. We do that through two methods. One of them is we look at air modeling data. And actually in the process, we're looking, we're going back and forth now with Dominion. We're looking at Dominion's air, modeling data. It's taken a while. That stuff is very complex. Sometimes we get modeling data in. We don't think it's all that great. We tell them to look at it, tweak it, tweak things. So we're looking at that modeling data now, working with Dominion on that now. And the data has to assure, taking even into account background data, background modeling, has to assure that the NOx, that ozone and NOx standards are not, that they won't exceed the NAAQS. And that permit will not be issued if there's any indication that that plant would cause a NAAQS exceedance here in Varina or anywhere else for that matter. Let me just finish this part. And the second thing we do is make sure that the plant installs uses what's called best available control technology on its units. So it's sort of a two-phase thing. But even if the plant does use best available control technology, we still can't permit it if the modeling data indicates that there's going to be an exceedance of the NAAQS. So it's a negotiated process. We have to make sure that they have operating restrictions and technology that assure there's no exceedance of the NAAQS. Now, the other question you asked about the Virginia Clean Economy Act and being, there is a state law that's going to, that will limit the generation of greenhouse gases by, I think in Dominion's case, is it 2040 or 20, something like that. I can't remember the dates. They're so far out. Well, no, that's going to be a challenge. That's something that the state will have to be working on. But it's really not a factor, right now as we're evaluating the power plant. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Real quickly, just in the middle of what you said there, you talked about nitrogen oxides and the other things that were used to affecting health. However, I think it's the same thing we can agree here with the increase of the effects of climate change. Largely driven, almost everyone agrees, by the incredible increases, in the fossil fuels and CO2, Ryan. Numbers might have an idea about that. The regional numbers currently, last ones I've seen, said that the proposed plant really almost throw a rock really hard across the river and hit it. It's going to be 4.5 billion tons of CO2 a year coming out of that plant, going up into the atmosphere. You're saying, since that's not one of the monitored dangerous gases with here, though, but you said you're protecting us from health. It seems like anything proposal to put that incredible amount more CO2 into the atmosphere is going to affect our health, whether it's the people living down high water when storms come in, or just the heat on 100-degree days that are a little bit higher than what they used to be. That's our health. And it seems like when you're limiting health to noxious things, that it's being short-sighted, and I don't think you're taking care of the public.
Your point is well taken. When I mention health, yes, I do mean exceedances of the national ambient air quality standards for those 6, 7, 8 criteria pollutants, as well as air toxics. That's true. Carbon dioxide is not currently regulated under Virginia law. Yep. Understood. Is there? Yes, ma'am.
Everybody has touched on it, either the data centers or Dominion. What do you take into consideration of a region and all of these things cumulatively are exposing us here to? Not just that, okay, Dominion is within range, the data centers are within range, but together, what are they doing to this region? And when you're doing a new permit, are you thinking about, okay, this is a lot of concentration. We have to spread this out. Like they're saturated right now. Like if all things were to go south, that we're sitting at ground zero between the airport and the data centers and Dominion and the sterilization plant, one good event and we're there.
Well, what we do is, and we do this pollutant by pollutant. And I'll mention it for the larger, what we call our PSD permits that CERC, the Dominion plant, is subject to. When we do our air modeling, whether it's for CERC or other large facilities, we take into account background concentrations. We take into account the emissions of other nearby facilities. So we do take, in that sense, we do look at cumulative impact. I mean, if someone else was attempting to build a big power plant next to CERC or something like that, we would look at the cumulative impact of the pollutants from all the nearby sources, and they would still have to assure, the applicant would have to assure that the national ambient air quality standards are not exceeded, even taking into account the background sources resulting from emissions from other facilities. Now, it is done pollutant by pollutant. We do not do cumulative impacts of how you rate one pollutant against, rating one pollutant against another. Quite frankly, we don't know how to do that. But we do look at the cumulative impacts of specific pollutants.
I think we had another question.
Yes.
Did you have one?
Sorry. I have one comment, a follow-up on Aileen and my husband about the health considerations. I don't understand why you can't involve medical people and health people, in this process of permitting.
Well, We do, except that they've already been taken into account. What I mean by that is that the Clean Air Act, this is federal law, imposes, it sort of sets a two-phase system to protect public health. EPA, it's EPA's responsibility to set the national ambient air quality standards, and they do that through a very complex, multi-party type of approach. The Clean Air Act requires that they take the advice of health experts, that they take the advice or at least comments from the public. Now, those are done when the EPA establishes the NACs. Now, it is our responsibility to implement the health-based standards. We do not at DEQ or in the state create air pollution health standards. That's really EPA. We implement those standards.
But I'm certain we have people in the state who have the expertise to do that.
Oh, I'm not quite sure I know what you're asking. Are you implying that Virginia should set its own state ambient air quality standards? That's been suggested before.
Considering, what we've been talking about, the amount of pollution that the gas plant's going to be producing, I don't think that's a bad idea.
Okay.
And also, on a jumping topics on you a little bit, can you explain the process when things aren't maybe up to the standards that some entity has reported, when the inspectors get involved?
You mean how our enforcement process works?
Yes.
Okay. In general, we'll send, inspections take many forms. We have something, and to channel Jerome here, we have what we call full compliance inspections, FCEs, and we have PCEs, partial compliance inspections. Some plants, and like power plants in particular, have what continuous emission monitors for numerous pollutants, and they send us the emissions data from their, we call them SEMs, continuous emission monitors. They send them to us on a quarterly basis, and we look through those very thoroughly. We send inspectors out on a regular basis, more regular for the larger facilities. As Jerome said, Title V facilities, it's every 2 years. Other facilities, it's not quite as frequent, but we do look at that. We do the desktop reviews. And there are certain types of violations we consider more serious than others. The two most serious violations for air pollution purposes are installing a piece of polluting equipment without getting a permit. We have very little tolerance for that. And the other is emissions violations that, of emission standards. And sometimes we can tell that through their SEMS data, or we can tell it through a stack test. Another way we determine, compliance is through stack tests. And we, some of them, I don't know, every 5 years, not too frequently. It depends on the source. Yeah, it depends on the permit, depends on the type of source. Sources that have bad compliance records, we often require them to stack test more frequently. For the QTS facility, we're going to require at least 10% of their generators to test. Yeah, I haven't gotten to the enforcement thing. So once we believe that there has been a violation, we talk to the source, we send out something called what we call a notice of alleged violation, and that's a formal legal type document. Folks who say they have to come in, we try to settle it before going to court. And oftentimes we do get to settle. We're far more focused on getting compliance than we are on money. Money is a factor, but our chief goal in enforcement and compliance is to get the facility back meeting its emission limits as soon as possible, or getting a permit with strict emission controls issued as soon as possible. And then there is the money factor. I think we can impose up to $32,000 a day. It's pretty high. We hardly ever do that per day per violation. We don't usually get that. For really, really bad, violators, we can work collaboratively with EPA, and we've done that in the past. They're always looking over our shoulder. And that's one thing. It's called overfiling. It's a technical term. It's called overfiling. Just about all our state clean air requirements are enforced, can be enforced by the federal government. And in the past, they've done that. I know there's been concern expressed tonight about how rigorous this EPA may be. I'll say one thing about air compliance at EPA so far. They seem to be still doing their job pretty rigorous. It's it's not getting reported that much, but the on the ground folks that we deal with up at Region 3 in both permitting and compliance seem to be still doing their job. They're still doing inspections. They're still writing federal NOVs. They're still working with us. So I don't know if that answers your question. Enforcement cases often move far more slowly than you'd like, but our biggest goal is to get folks into compliance as soon as possible. Tamara.
I shouldn't be saying anything about compliance because I'm a permitting person, but one of the other things that our regulations do require, if there's a malfunction at a facility, they have 4 business hours to let us know about that malfunction. And if they don't, then that's a violation as well. So there are mechanisms built into the regs that, hey, if something goes wrong, you better tell us, and you better tell us quick.
Yeah, that can vary. The length of time it takes to correct it can vary depending on the nature of the problem.
Just to add a single comment, really, we don't like to see the enforcement piece. We are focused on durable compliance because for you to go to enforcement means you've done something wrong. So we try to be proactive in that aspect. We do a lot of compliance assistance if need be, but really the focus is on durable compliance. If enforcement has to take place, we take that very seriously, but you've got to get there first. And our preference is not to get there. Just want to put that out there. And somebody asked a minute ago about being so technical. Do you have to be real technical? The permit aspect, when the permits come in, it's good to know what you're talking about if you're going to comment on a permit. But if you're just talking about a visual observation or something you hear from a facility or whatever it may be, we have a PREP database that's online. And if you were to notify us.
What's PREP?
PREP, pollution response. Pollution response database. If you were to notify us about anything you're concerned, I mean, if you see a generator smoking and you're concerned about it for a long period of time, you can notify the region, which I am in, and we will send the staff out to investigate that. So you don't have to be extremely technical not to say, look at something and know it's not right. If you see something, if you smell something is not quite right, it's alarming to you, the database is there. Use the database and notify us.
Yeah, I'll just add, we're going through a real heat wave now. The grid isn't going down. If folks hear QTS engines running for a long, for 10 hours or something like that, let us know, because that would be breaking the law. I mean, a test, how long does it take to test one of those engines? 20 minutes? Less than that? Yeah. So, I mean, if you hear them running for long periods of time, let us know. File complaints. I mean, we follow up on complaints.
Let me.
Yes, sir.
One question. So I know, I think Ms. K-Span sent in some questions, and we're going to get a response back from DEQ for all of those. I do know the last question is, what is the timeline for finalizing the permit? And they're talking about the QTS Title V permit. And how can the public continue to stay involved after this particular meeting?
Talk about the timeline.
Yeah, good day.
So I think Tamara or Mike may have mentioned that we had the public comment period for this Title V permit that I guess started in April and ran through part or most of May. Okay. So then what we have done or what we're doing now is our regional staff are taking all the comments that were made and are evaluating those comments and trying to develop responses to them. And I think there were also just some straight questions that came in during that 30-day period as well. And so we're also developing a separate document to respond to those questions that came in. And once we have prepared that response to the comments document and the response to the questions, the next step will be to forward that up through DEQ leadership to get that permit ready to go to EPA for EPA's 45-day review. Again, that I think Tamara had that earlier in one of her slides. And then so that we would then basically be on hold until EPA gave us some kind of an indication about how they felt about the permit. And they actually also evaluate their response to comments document to make sure we've adequately addressed all the comments the way we're legally required to do. Yes.
I think, yeah.
Something to have a formal public hearing so more people can show up in person, or you have to decide with them.
I think that is still under consideration. Yeah. But
You know, it's like that's the opportunity in person. So this is, Pastor Nelson is hosting this, but it's not necessarily like a formal way for DEQ to hear the public. But having a public, so that people show up like this and ask simple questions, they challenge you to these things.
I would just make one correction to that. During a formal public hearing, we are not responding to questions. That's just basically another opportunity for the public to comment on that permit. But there is no back and forth with us. We're just listening to the public, recording the comments that are made, and then those would be additional comments that we would need to respond to as part of our response to comments.
All right. Well, we advertised this meeting from 5:37, so we'll take a couple more questions or comments, and then we'll wrap up.
I just want to say really quick, thank you, Supervisor Nelson, for giving us the opportunity to talk. This is great. This is a great opportunity to clear out some of our questions. Thank you for everyone at DEQ and Henrico County that came to help answer questions. And the only thing that I don't think I speak for myself, I know in speaking of a lot of people in the community, is that this is what we need more of, these communications with DEQ. DEQ has been an ally in many good issues, but I hope that you understand I can't drive the message enough. The perfect example was, not to bring up again PFAS, but PFAS was an issue that back in 2016, when Wallops Island was going through what they were going through, it was on the news for like 2 years. Everything about PFAS. And somehow we fumbled the ball, and that's what any one specific person, it just happened here. And so I think that if we maintain these communications with the community, that these are things that we can help each other make sure that doesn't happen again. So it's just more of the communication, open communication like this with DEQ would be super helpful for everybody involved. So thanks again for.
Well, certainly appreciate your input on that. You know, as I think Stan said, we do have an open door policy. Give us a buzz, and I guess fortunately for me, I'm not the PFAS guy, so I can't answer any questions on PFAS. But we hear you, and you know, we do want to work together and collaboratively as we go forward. Absolutely.
All right. Any other final? Yes.
And this is just informational. You said that you do the cumulative monitoring of the different pollutions, and where can we get that information and match it to the national average or state regulation?
Well, I think she's talking more about the modeling data that we. Well, the DEQ website does have a lot of information. I guess the question was, how can the public sort of vet the data, the information that we get to assure, to assure that we are, that our applicant isn't getting away with projected violations of the NACs. Our modeling data is public. I mean, that's certainly FOIAable. It's very complex to read the modeling data. I'm not sure what the best answer to that question is, so I'll rely on my super technical guy here.
And I took your question to be kind of more monitoring based. And so we do have, from our entire monitoring network around the state, we have online on our website accessible reports that describe the emission data those monitors are recording, for the most recent periods of time where we've gotten the data and verified the accuracy of it, and then going back many years, right? So you can actually track the progression of what the air quality being monitored has been like in different parts of the state over the whole time we've had those monitors in place. So
What's the current monitoring? It shows hourly, you can go in and see if we
right. I think some of the links, and I'm not super familiar with it, but there are some links to actually get to real time. Some of the monitors provide real time data. And I think some of that data is on our external website.
Yeah, I think Air Now.
But is there any way for us to get the copy of these slides from,
I have to ask Steve.
Steve?
Yeah.
Steve said he'll send them out, and you're welcome to them. And if you all, to reiterate, we're always happy to talk to you guys, anybody. I mean, that's what our job is to help people understand and to do. I mean, we wouldn't, if we didn't want to protect the environment, we would not be in these jobs, plain and simple. So we want to, want you to know that, we are happy. This stuff can be really complicated, really challenging. As I tell people, I've been doing this 33 years, and there's not a week that goes by that I don't learn something new. But we are always happy. Give us a call. We will sit down with you and try to go over whatever we can.
One quick thing about the monitoring. Okay, you mentioned Shirley Plantation and Hanover, and I just don't know how this works. Is the air? It just seems like the air that we had here, and then it looks like it's for a lot of this is happening with the airport and then generators and everything. That would be best monitored closer to this area, because by the time it travels up to Hanover and down to Shirley Plantation, it's back to the environment. And I know you said monitoring is expensive.
But I think probably the one that's to the west of QTS and to the west of the airport and a little bit north. And unfortunately, I'm drawing a blank on the Math and Science Center is. But that one I think probably is the one that is the closest to the Varina area and maybe the centroid of what the district would be. And I just, the other thing I say is in general in Virginia, air weather, air meteorological patterns are for the air masses to move south to north or occasionally kind of east to west. We don't, except for a hurricane, right? You usually don't have anything going from east to west. I mean, you'll have very, any given time of a day, if you're standing in a spot, the wind might be blowing in kind of one direction or the other. But just in terms of the overall meteorological pattern, there's very rarely that you're going to have, any kind of lengthy transport from east to west. And so I think that monitor that we have that's at the Math Science Center.
Central Gardens.
Okay.
Formerly I didn't know they changed
it. Is pretty representative of the area that we have been talking about here tonight.
Sure. All right. Thank you. You had one more? Okay. We did get a question from WebEx. And so really it's just like can you give us a wrap up? Somebody on WebEx said, can you explain this in a way that everyone can understand, including people who may not read well or who didn't grow up with this kind of language? Nobody knows what a final answer is. Explain what he is telling people to read on the website. So is there just like a layman's version? And I know that's almost an impossible task of what you shared over the past hour and a half, maybe. Yes, ma'am.
was gonna say, you're welcome to share our information and we're happy to.
Right. So, well, let me let you try to give a layman's, and there are community groups out, and so which group am I telling them to look up? The Route 5 Corridor Coalition or what? All right, so there are other groups. If you're watching online, Route 5 Corridor Coalition, I know being one, if you want to get with them and look them up online. But please, sir, if you don't mind, just wrap it up in like a minute with a layman's.
Okay.
I don't know if you can do it. Good job.
Well, let me put it this way. The Clean Air Act tells EPA and the states to protect human health and the environment. And EPA has enacted what they call ambient air quality standards for 8 pollutants, and they've also promulgated a bunch of regulations of various sources for toxic pollutants as well. Now, EPA sets those standards. It is our responsibility under both state and federal law to make sure make sure we meet air quality standards. And it's our responsibility, and we're going to do this with both CERC as well as QTS. We have done it with QTS in prior permitting actions, and we're doing it with CERC now. We will assure in the QTS process and the CERC process, we will assure that air quality will remain. It'll remain under the National Air Quality Standards. I hate to use the word healthy air, but it'll meet clean air standards. We assure that by modeling, by monitoring, and by imposing best available control technology. And we do that for all the permits throughout the state. We assure that air quality standards are met and air toxic standards are met. That's our job.
All right, that's thank you, sir. All right, again, for those of you who are here in person and if you're watching online, thank you for spending the past hour and a half with us. I do want to again thank Ms. Klein for asking, could we get DEQ here for a conversation, even though it was after the public comment period. And though the county can't make DEQ do public hearings, I really am appreciative that Michael Dowd, Tamara Thompson, Jerome Brooks, and what's your name again, sir, so I can shout you out too? Stanley Faggart are all here. So whether you agree or whatever be the case, they made presentations, answered questions, and I'm sure they'll be around to share information. We also have our deputy county manager here who has oversight over some of these areas as well. So have a good evening, and until we see each other again, enjoy the rest of your summer.